Let's turn now to an end-of-the-year look at some of the key trends that are worth watching in Israel's economy.
That tell two very different
2017,
stories.
Indeed, that tell two very different stories. In the studio with us is Professor Claude Berrebi, Director of Research at the Taub Center at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and our economy correspondent, Asher Westrop Evans. Asher, let's start briefly with a look at the latest annual report on Israel's booming tech sector.
Look, the tech sector in Israel has had a record year in 2017, $7.44 billion in exits throughout the year of 2017. That's mergers, acquisitions, and initial public offerings throughout the year, really up from the slump that was 2016, where only $3.5 billion was recorded. Really a record trend, setting a good start and a good position for the tech sector.
And we're talking about averages of about, what is it, $100 million? That just speaks to exactly the kind of range of prices we're talking about here.
That's exactly right. $106 million to be precise, average per exit. These are massive amounts of money flowing into the Israeli economy, these big booms, these big spikes throughout the Israeli economy that are being held up by this tech sector.
So we have two different stories here, because despite those strong numbers from the tech center and some other positive economic indicators, we're talking about record low unemployment, I believe, many Israelis are finding it a struggle to get by day to day. Now, this new Taub Center report, Claude, really puts the numbers to that. What did you find about the high cost of living for those of us not working in tech?
So, first of all, things are improving a little bit. It's improving a little bit in some of the sectors, in some of those items that actually prices have dropped, like clothing and shoes and furniture, communication, travel, leisure, and a few other things that we use. There are two items that remain high and continue to prices to continue to increase. Those are food prices mostly, not all of them, but some of them, and housing. Now, some of what you actually said about the high-tech sector is one of the explanation for the why that you are asking.
When you have exits of $100 million and prices go up?
When you have a very strong influx of foreign currency, then the shekel actually strengthens and there is an evaluation. When there is an evaluation, prices here become more expensive. The local prices, the local goods become more expensive when you compare them to other places. So the cost of living actually increases. But not everyone is employed in the high-tech sector. Sure. So basically, you have this dual economy, those differences between those who have to suffice with very low income because they are producing the local produce, and the others that are in the high-tech sector or other advanced sectors, and they can export, and they have a profit of margin that is actually quite high, so they can also withstand the increase in the valuation of the shekel.
Claude, I know at the Taub Center, you're not just doing research, you're looking for answers, not just diagnosing the problems. What could at least partially be done, starting with the government, to sort of address this issue, which is really hurting a lot of Israelis? People talk about leaving the country, going to places like Berlin, because life is cheaper there.
So, paradoxically, basically, one of the solutions, not for the housing prices, but for the other items, is basically allowing import much more freely than it is today, basically taking down any of the customs or any of the barriers that we have right now for imports. Sometimes it's regulation, sometimes it's something else, but there are many, many barriers. Now, when you allow for import, there is competition in the country, prices go down, and also those who work here improve because the productivity actually goes higher.
So is this ultimately up to the government to fix?
Not only, but it is up to the government to allow for it to happen. So otherwise, I mean, if they will not, if they will remain all those barriers, if they will leave all those barriers in place, then those things cannot happen.
Claude, I want to ask about what was probably the most vexing economic problem for Israelis, which is the cost of housing in this country, which far outstrips the rate of inflation. In fact, we haven't really had any real inflation in the last few years, and yet housing, we go see 9%, 10%. What is driving the housing prices? What needs to be done?
Not enough houses. That's basically the very short solution to a big question. As long as the supply doesn't meet the demand and the demand is increasing and the supply is not even covering past demands, we will have an increase in prices. Now, we can try to play tricks with certain policies, one or another. You can call it whatever you want. You can try to do publicity. But at the end of the day, as long as the supply doesn't increase dramatically and is also associated with everything around it, like infrastructure, everything, so those houses are something that people can buy, then the prices will not be stabilized and certainly not go down in the housing market. And as you said, this is the item. The fact that the inflation outside of the housing market is actually low is a sign of all of those things that I've said. Prices are actually going down in other items, but for housing, it's remaining. And
so we're talking about what you say is really two different economies, two different realities. And Asher, when we're looking at those numbers, to jump back to that very different reality of hundreds of millions of dollars these companies sold, how much is it about a culture, a sort of exit culture?
Well, exactly right, Nurid. It is about Israeli companies that come in and, build up these big enterprises, they build up these big markets, but then inevitably sell outside the economy, and they give these big cash injections, but that doesn't necessarily spread freely over the rest of the economy. And you're seeing in other parts outside the high-tech sector, low productivity, low wages, and low skills where people just aren't being trained for the modern economy and the modern jobs that are being required here in Israel.
And it's ironic, we celebrate some of these big exits. We love to hear about Google buying this company or that, but if some of those companies would develop in Israel, they'd keep their factories here, maybe there'd be even some sort of less skilled jobs available, but it doesn't seem to happen.
No, exactly right, Kalev. It doesn't necessarily reflect on the wider economy. There is a select few that get the opportunity to get to go into these sectors, that have the connections, that have the education, but those wider educational moves to help people in other parts of the economy aren't necessarily filtering through.
How much do you think that affects the greater picture, that we see that sort of exit culture where people don't really want to build a company here and keep it?
Actually, I don't think that's much of a problem. However, the other things that were mentioned are the problem. So you need that. You need those exits. You need the influx of money. It's not a bad thing. We discover natural gas. We get a lot of money. That's a good thing. We have an exit. We get a lot of money. That's a good thing. However, you also need to be able to increase productivity, labor productivity in all the rest of the economy. To do so, you need investments, you need education, you need a lot of training, you need a lot of things that are not done right now, not enough at least, and you need also to give those some help, the same help that you would give to the exporters in the high-tech.
A tale of two economies, something we see really around the world, but maybe more extreme right here in Israel. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us.